A man named Jim wakes up from a pod after 120 years of hibernation. The AI informs him that they're preparing to transfer everyone on the spacecraft from Earth to a new planet, Homestead 2, restarting civilization. Jim receives good news that he'll soon be able to spend time with his friends and enjoy himself within the next 4 months. Jim finds the room he'll stay in until they land and retrieves his luggage. He dresses up and finds an empty room where an AI greets him. The AI introduces Homestead to the passengers, but Jim is confused about why he's the only one there. He asks the AI where everyone is, and the AI replies that everyone's on the spacecraft and doesn't correctly answer his question. Jim runs around shouting for other people, then enters an elevator where he starts floating due to the gravity imbalance. When the elevator drops him off, a service AI tells him he can consult a flight attendant for help on the 3rd floor. Jim doesn't find anyone, so he panics and returns to the AI to see the pilot. Jim is directed to the pilot's cabin but can't obtain access without authorization. He peeps through the door, but there's no one inside. Jim enters the observatory and asks the AI to show him Homestead 2. A holographic of outer space appears, indicating the distance between Earth and Homestead 2. The AI informs him they'll reach their destination in 90 years, making Jim panic. When he asks how long they left Earth, the AI replies that it was 30 years ago. Jim realizes he woke up 90 years too soon, then returns to the service AI and asks if he can contact Earth. Jim leaves a video message and sends it, but he's informed that it'll be sent in 19 years, and receiving a reply will take 55 years at the earliest. Jim looks dejected and walks around. He finds a man at the bar and rushes towards him in relief to see another human. The bartender serves him whiskey, and Jim realizes he's just an android. The bartender introduces himself as Arthur, and Jim asks about the hibernation pods. Arthur explains they're fail-proof, but Jim tells him otherwise since he's woken up 90 years earlier. Arthur glitches when the math registers and says Jim shouldn't be there. The following day, Jim wakes up and orders coffee at the empty cafeteria. He finds a manual about hibernation pods and attempts to fix his pod so that he can return to hibernation. After tinkering, his pod turns on and he gets inside. Jim closes his eyes, but nothing happens. He leaves and tries to break into the pilot's cabin. Time has passed and Jim hasn't achieved success. When he leaves for the bar, a critical alert appears in the pilot's cabin, causing lights and doors to malfunction. Jim talks to his only companion, and Arthur advises him to stop worrying about what he can't control and live a little. Jim follows Arthur's advice and takes advantage of the ship's services. Much time passes as he repeats his daily routine, looking more haggard than ever. He angrily throws a bottle, then sees a room next to the pods to find spacesuits inside. He wears one and steps outside the ship to explore. When he jumps off to float in space, he starts crying. Jim returns inside but approaches the lever without a suit, attempting to surrender his life to space. He gets scared and runs away, slipping on the bottle he threw. He gets up and looks over at the pod next to him. Inside is a woman named Aurora, and he searches the database for her profile. Jim plays Aurora's introduction, where she explains she's a writer and wants to live a life full of adventures, which is why she's on the spacecraft. Jim sits beside her pod with his breakfast, replaying her introduction video in awe. He continues to binge her video, laughing at her jokes. Jim looks at the side and sees the hibernation pod manual, getting an idea. Jim consults Arthur about it but doesn't receive proper feedback because he's a machine. Jim stands next to Aurora's pod anxiously, clutching the manual. Jim tries to distract himself from touching Aurora's pod and to get her out of his mind. It doesn't work, and Jim fixes his appearance before tinkering with Aurora's pod. He goes for it, and the machine lights up, opening her pod. Jim quickly cleans up and hides himself along with the equipment, panting from anxiousness. He finally talks with Aurora in person, who's confused about the entire situation. Jim takes her to the observatory, which announces they'll arrive in 89 years. Then he shows her the pilot's cabin where the crew are hibernating. Aurora notices the tools on the ground and wonders how long Jim's been awake. Jim informs her it's already been a year, causing her to panic and look for her pod to return to sleep. Jim calms Aurora down, saying there's a particular way to get into hibernation, but they won't be able to do it. Aurora heads to her cabin to rest, and Jim leaves for the bar, looking dejected. Arthur congratulates him about Aurora, but notices Jim seems unhappy. Jim orders Arthur not to tell Aurora the truth since she thinks it's an accident and will tell her himself eventually. Aurora wakes up and tries to get answers from the service AI, but it doesn't help. Jim escorts her for breakfast, and the machine glitches as they walk away. At the cafeteria, Aurora is baffled by the menu Jim has been eating for a year, and she serves him food from her gold-class menu. They discuss what to do to return to hibernation, but Jim tells her he's already tried everything throughout the year. Aurora doesn't want to give up and explores the ship, hoping for a solution. Meanwhile, Jim notices a robot vacuum malfunctioning. Aurora approaches Jim to ask why he did it, and he panics, thinking she found out that he woke her up. Jim is relieved when Aurora wants to interview him about why he chose to migrate. Aurora reveals she plans to stay at Homestead 2 for a year and return to Earth to write about it, but gets sad since it may never happen due to their situation. She tells Jim she doesn't know what else to do to save them and wants to stop thinking about it. When Aurora asks him what they can do as entertainment, Jim shows her around the ship, spends time together, and laughs with Arthur at the bar. Jim fixes the robot vacuum and uses it to ask Aurora out on a date. They have drinks at the bar and eat dinner at the ship's restaurant, where Aurora opens up about her life. After dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the room with spacesuits. Aurora gets Bear to wear the spacesuit, teasing Jim with her dress on the floor. They hold hands as they float in space, and Aurora thanks him for the experience. Jim takes her to the room he had stolen and they clap in his bed. Things continue to get steamy the morning after at the cafeteria, and they basically exercise all day, every day. Aurora writes about her time at the spacecraft with Jim, no longer feeling as sad as she used to about their situation. Jim surprises her with roses, and an announcement alerts them about a star they're passing by. Jim wishes her a happy birthday, and they have dinner with cake. Arthur serves them drinks, and Aurora tells Arthur there are no secrets between her and Jim. Jim excuses himself to prepare his proposal for Aurora, and Arthur mentions that Jim had anticipated meeting her a year before. Aurora gets confused, and Arthur reveals Jim's secret. Tears burn in her eyes when she realizes Jim woke her up as he returns to the bar. Aurora confronts him, and Jim has no choice but to tell the truth. Aurora has a panic attack and shouts at Jim to stay away from her. Aurora becomes hysterical and enters Jim's room at night to beat him up. She grabs the crowbar on the ground to hurt him, but can't bear to do it. When Aurora goes for a jog, Jim relays his explanation through an announcement. Jim confesses he loves Aurora, but she screams out that she doesn't care about his BS because he took her life away. In Jim's room, the system reboots and things malfunction. Several alerts are at the pilot's cabin, but it glitches and shuts down. Aurora goes through videos her friends left for her, and her best friend wishes she'll finally find her other half. Aurora enters her pod and cries herself to sleep. The next day, Aurora finds a tree in the lobby, which Jim had been working on the night before. Jim's inside the elevator when it stops working, causing him to force his way out. Meanwhile, Aurora gets heaps of cereal upon ordering her breakfast. They suddenly hear an announcement, and it's the deck chief named Gus asking about the tree. Aurora and Jim rush to the lobby and they introduce themselves. Jim informs him there's 88 years left, and Gus is distraught about the faulty pods. Gus leads them inside the pilot's cabin, but the ship's diagnostics don't show data, so Gus has to do a manual checkup. Aurora and Jim assist him with it while Gus checks up on the hibernation pods. He discovers the problem with Jim's, but realizes that Aurora's pod was Jim's doing. Back at the pilot's cabin, Gus has difficulty with the ship's system, and Aurora complains about what Jim did. Jim enters, and Gus starts coughing and feeling weak. When Gus arrives at his room, he coughs up blood. Jim and Gus sleep while Aurora goes for a swim. There's an alert about gravity loss, causing everything to start floating. Aurora struggles to get out of the water, falling unconscious. Gravity returns, dropping Jim and Aurora. They rush to awaken Gus, and the three get to the pilot's cabin to check out the system's data. Gus discovers many failures 2 years ago that caused Jim to wake up. Gus plans to scope the problem manually since diagnostics are down, but he passes out before they can start. Gus is taken to the infirmary and scanned in a pod, revealing 612 disorders within his body that can't be treated. Gus explains that his hibernation pod is the cause, and the AI announces he doesn't have much time left. The ship rings an alarm about difficulties in flight, and the two find Gus in his uniform looking out the window in pain. Gus gives his bracelet to Jim for access to fix the ship. Gus takes his final breath. Then the spacecraft starts shaking, lights going red. The duo searches through the machines for problems and finds a room with multiple holes inside. They patch up a hole and realize that a meteor crashed through, damaging a vital part of the ship 2 years ago. Jim replaces the broken part, but the ship fails to recuperate due to other problems. They have no choice but to fix things manually, forcing Jim to go outside the ship to open the vents. Aurora cries and tells him to return safely since she can't live without him. Aurora returns to the pit, but the room is rising in heat. A piece of metal bursts and stabs her in the arm. Jim arrives at the vents, but the door won't stay open. He tells Aurora he'll be stuck there, causing her to panic. Jim orders Aurora to pull the lever, but he'll die if she does. Aurora tells him to return inside to think of another plan, but Jim says there's no time. The glass starts to crack, and Jim demands that she pull the lever. The heat releases out of the vent, burning Jim's spacesuit. The air conduction drags him away, and the ship's temperature is restored. Aurora calls out for Jim, but the tether is broken, and he can't return inside. Aurora rushes to fetch him, but his suit's temperature and oxygen levels are dropping. Jim apologizes to Aurora, saying he wishes he'd met her properly in 90 years and would have built a home for her. Aurora steps outside and locates Jim with her suit. When Aurora is near him, the tether isn't long enough for her to grab him. Aurora holds the tether attached to Jim and drags him back inside. At the infirmary, the AI announces Jim as deceased, and she shouts to resuscitate him. It isn't possible without authorization, but she realizes she has Gus's bracelet. Aurora overrides multiple procedures on Jim to revive him. The machine finishes, yet Jim doesn't move. After a while, he releases a breath, causing Aurora to cry happily and hug him. Aurora fixes Arthur, and Jim releases Gus into space as he rests peacefully. Back at the infirmary, Jim informs Aurora that the infirmary pod can hibernate a person, just like the hibernation pods. She tells him there's only one, and Jim says she can go back to sleep and wake up at Homestead 2, where she can finish her journey. Aurora is sad that Jim will be alone on the ship, and she'll never see him again in 88 years. Jim sits at the bar with Arthur, and Aurora walks in beautifully. Jim slips the ring he made for her on her finger, and they kiss. The couple spend the rest of their lives on the ship, which eventually arrives at Homestead 288 years later. The crew is first to wake up, and they are met with a large tree and greenery all over the lobby, along with a message from Aurora. Aurora and Jim may not have reached Homestead 2, but Arthur will live on to tell their story to everyone on the ship.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.